Doc Rivers, the NBA's second biggest con man, has once again found himself at the helm of an NBA team that has no less than 2 All-Stars. Not surprisingly though, since Doc's taken over the coaching responsibilities for the Bucks, he's been thriving on a losing record, doing so while digging up every excuse in the book, even down to blaming his own team playing defense too hard, and recently also just saying he wouldn't wish this position on his worst enemy. Well, this brings up the question, why did you accept the job then, Doc? Also, interestingly enough, Doc was also chosen to be the Eastern All-Stars coach, despite getting the job with the Bucks less than a month prior. As for the excuses though, they are finally coming to head, and one of his former players turned media talking head, JJ Redick, recently sounded off on Doc for all of those excuses that we've become accustomed to hearing the second he underperforms as a coach. Very reminiscent to when he blew a 3-1 series lead to the Pistons back in 2003, claiming he deserved credit for even getting 3 wins as an 8th-seeded facing the eventual champs. Well, the Pistons were not the champs in 2003, not to mention he did coach that squad to that 8th seed, but conveniently now that it comes to criticism, Doc finds a clever way to deflect from that. A trend that is very common amongst his illustrious career, as he did win a ring back in 2008, you know. Don't believe me? Well, just listen to Doc Rivers talk for more than 3 minutes and he'll remind you of that fact. So let's look back on that career and see how Doc Rivers truly conned his way into this job with the Bucks and every other job. Doc started off his coaching journey in Orlando and won Coach of the Year in his first season, which is part of the reason he was seen as such a great coach. But the truth is, that Magic team only won 41 games, lower than their expected 43 wins prior to the season. Not to mention, the team didn't even make the playoffs. But still, this was Doc's year to win, right? Well, this did make him the first coach since the 70s to win the award while coaching a team to a 500 win record. So, great stuff, Doc, I guess. The following years in Orlando, Doc's teams would get slightly better behind Tracy McGrady and an injured Grant Hill, who would find some playing time between surgeries. But for the most part, T-Mac's career was largely wasted, and Doc's ineptitude could partially be to blame. During those Doc Rivers-led years, Tracy McGrady was truly hitting his peak, winning a scoring title in 2003, but when you look at the rest of the players in the top 5 for that year, they all at least made it out of the first round. But for T-Mac and the Magic, they fell to Doc's license and patent signature move of blowing a 3-1 series lead to the previously mentioned Pistons, who senile Dr. Rivers mistook for the 2003 NBA champs, as he was trying to find reassurance that he was a good coach. But after last year's playoffs, with the entire world watching the 8th-seeded Miami Heat blow their way through the Eastern Conference and make it to the finals, he can't really use that, "oh, I got 3 wins" excuse anymore, as that Miami Heat team is actually coached by someone deserving of their stature. Coach Eric Spoelstra pulled off some genius moves, using his roster that, on paper, seemed to be filled with less talent to truly expose teams' weak points. Now, sure, to be fair to Doc, he didn't have his super team, or at minimum, 2 All-Stars, but the fact that he didn't is actually Doc's own fault. As Grant Hill recently dove deeper into his story that Doc Rivers actually blew the opportunity to have Tim Duncan come join the Magic after Timmy was all in. But apparently, someone in his entourage had asked Doc if Tim would be allowed to bring his family members on the plane, to which Doc quickly said no. During the telling of the story, you can almost see T-Mac imagining himself wringing Doc Rivers' neck like Homer and Bart, but it had to be even worse when Paul Pierce, who was also on the panel, said that Doc had no problem with players bringing friends and family aboard the team plane in Boston, which now seems to be a good transition point to talk about his next destination, the Boston Celtics. After doing his signature move by blowing a 3-1 series lead, he went on the following season to lead that same Magic team to a 1-10 record before getting fired. He wisely took a break from the league before getting a call to come to Boston and get a chance to coach one of the league's rising stars in Paul Pierce. So of course, Doc jumped at that chance and headed down to Boston. But in typical Doc fashion, he brought a trend of failure with him, as the team went from 45 wins the year he got there, down to 33 wins the following year, till they were eventually dragged down to record the second worst record in the Boston Celtics' 78-year history. Again, great stuff, Doc. The head office finally bailed Doc out and got him Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen so he could coach the first modern super team, which actually paid off as the Celtics broke through and won their first championship in over 20 years. After that though, everything went down in a beautiful blaze of non-glory as tensions continued to rise and Doc's genius solutions to problems such as Rondo complaining Ray Allen doesn't pass the ball enough was to bench Ray Allen for Avery Bradley, which went over about as well as you'd expect it when it came to contract time, and the Celtics gave Doc a hefty 5-year contract, which meant all-time great shooter Ray Allen would have to come off the bench and take a pay cut for the guy who put him there. And that was the beginning of the end, as the team would slowly splinter off and Doc would do a mad dash to LA, getting into town before any Celtics fans could even realize what was happening. So Doc's time in Boston was done, and the philosophy that he tried to bring to the team, focusing on community and togetherness, was up in flames. But to be fair, I don't know too many communities and togetherness where the leader immediately tries to fight the new guy, but anyways, now it was time for Doc's sunny arrival in LA. And once again, Doc had his funny trick of making a team's record fall season over season, despite the talent being there, as this LA Clippers team was one of the most exciting teams of the 2010s, with many expectations being floated their direction, rightfully so. As not only was this team very solid, but Doc was seen as one of the greatest coaches of this era, for some reason. So when Doc went on in his first year to blow yet another 3-1 series lead, well, he got promoted to head of basketball operations, once again showing his skills as the NBA's second greatest con man. The Lob City era of the Clippers ended in nothing more than second round exits that you can see us talk about in more detail right up here, but it had seemed for a brief moment that Doc might not have a super team to coach, so I'm sure there was a lot of fear he might just do the dash, but the franchise was bailed out by Kawhi Leonard wanting to come home and bringing Paul George with him. But sadly, they forgot Doc Rivers was still the coach. So when it came to playoff time, surprise surprise, another 3-1 series lead blown. Shortly after that, Doc was fired, and in his departure with the team taking full credit for making the Clippers a quote-unquote real franchise, which probably should have been a red flag for any of the teams around the league that were looking for a new head coach. But the 76ers were desperate enough to bring in the bad doctor, and it ultimately cost them their process and the team's young point guard, as he was Doc Rivers' most recent victim to throw under the bus.
Doc, you think Ben Simmons can still be a point guard for a championship team like the one you guys want to become?
Yeah, David, I don't know that question or the answer to that right now.
Again, great stuff, Doc.
Once Doc threw yet another series lead after he got on with the Sixers, then went on to make the spark that eventually burned down Ben Simmons' career, the Sixers must have soon had a revelation that they too were being swindled by the fraud that is Doc Rivers. After his 2021 loss to the Hawks, which was still only his first season coaching the Sixers, everything went downhill fast. Ben Simmons had felt ostracized from the team by teammate Joel Embiid, and especially our man Doc Rivers after that playoff exit. For someone who preaches togetherness, Doc was pretty quick to blame Simmons on the team's playoff departure. Because of this, Ben ended up sitting the entire 22 season with medical issues that seemed sketchy at best, in hopes of a trade. While this specific issue is ultimately on Ben for being softer than Sharman, there is no denying that head coach Doc Rivers threw fuel on the fire instead of trying to uphold the team's morale. As we've discussed earlier, this is textbook Doc Rivers, being unable to manage the egos on teams despite his undeserved reputation of being a top-tier coach for teams with big stars. Despite the troubles, Doc carried on coaching the Sixers through the 2022 season. The season looked especially grim when all of the issues with Ben Simmons were happening and he refused to play. But when the Sixers managed to ship off Ben and other assets to the Nets for James Harden, the Sixers were once again being talked about as potential favorites. Joel Embiid plus a potentially remotivated Harden was a scary thought, and the potential came through in some games leading into the playoffs. Unfortunately, Harden had difficulties adapting to not being the number one option anymore at this point in his career, and was kind of starting to show his age, losing a step of speed he used to have when dashing for the rim. By the time the playoffs hit, Embiid was injured for 2 key playoff games, and most importantly, Doc showed that he really has no idea what he's doing. The Sixers were down 2 games when Embiid came back, and Embiid actually managed to put the team on his back and tie the series up 2-2. This is where the coaching genius of esteemed coach Doc Rivers is supposed to come in, but no, the Sixers lost Game 5 by a landslide soon after losing Game 6, and just like that, their season was over. Of course, it's tough to expect Harden to completely gel with the team in the short time that he was on it before making that playoff run. That's why the Sixers and Doc stayed hopeful going into the 23 season. Surely Harden would gel a bit more with the team and return to his old self. Well, this was true to an extent with the Sixers placing third in the regular season and looking like a strong team, the Sixers just couldn't get it done in the playoffs when it mattered. In the conference semis, the same story happened with Embiid getting injured for the first 2 games, but this time Harden actually carried the Sixers to a 1-1 series record in Embiid's absence. Embiid came back, played a few games, and the series ended up at 3-2 in Philly's favor. It was finally looking like this could be the run that Embiid finally wins a chip on. But if you know anything about Doc Rivers, you know that he throws series leads like it's going out of style. So of course it's only natural that Doc, and by extension Philly, threw this series lead, and it was the Celtics instead of the Sixers heading on to the conference finals. This is where the Sixers truly had enough of Doc Rivers and fired him. Instead of choosing to move on to a new team, he declared his intent to join the NBA broadcasting team. At this point, it felt like the whole league knew he was overrated, and it felt like a natural end to his career for him to live out his days in the broadcasting booth after failing to win championships post-Celtics with many different squads filled with amazing players. It was time for Doc to put the clipboard down and start swinging more clubs. All was right in the league for a time early in the season when there was no Doc, and all we heard from him was his mediocre broadcasting. Fast forward to a month ago, and the Bucks are hitting the panic button after realizing the Dame trade wasn't quite enough to make the team competitive with the much younger Celtics. As we all know, panic makes you do irrational things. Irrational things like hiring known NBA fraudster Doc Rivers. Either it was that or Doc has some kind of blackmail on someone high up in the Bucks. Speaking of blackmail, Doc Rivers, despite coaching for like 3 weeks, was chosen to represent the East in the All-Star game. Of course, the obvious choice would have been Joe Mazzulla of the Celtics. However, he coached the All-Stars Eastern team last year, so that made him ineligible. This left the league to look at the second-seeded team in the East to pick a coach from, the Milwaukee Bucks. So it does make a little bit of sense, but you would think the league would reward someone like JB Bickerstaff, who had coached the Cavs for the whole season to 3rd seed. This is the status quo of the NBA, however. Reward an undeserving Doc Rivers with amazing opportunities every step of the way because he got lucky and got to coach a super team through 1 championship, failing every other opportunity of his career. Again, he's gotta have some real dirt on Adam Silver or something to keep falling upwards like this. At this point in the season after Doc taking over the Bucks, they somehow look worse. They've lost their 2nd seed to a red-hot Cavs team and have gone 3-7 in their last 10. While regular season standings can always flip-flop like it's nothing, this is a team with championship aspirations we're talking about here, not just one hoping to squeak in and have a big run in the playoffs. Doc clearly is not the right man for the job, but they're stuck with him now. You can almost guarantee that unless Giannis channels his inner 6'11" Michael Jordan and Dame starts splashing from the logo night in, night out, the Bucks aren't winning anything major with Doc. The real question is, will Doc Rivers throw another 3-1 lead in the playoffs this year? Or will it be your average run-of-the-mill 3-2 lead throw that Doc has even more of? Let us know in the comments, and for new videos every week with the chance of them containing Doc Rivers slander, make sure to hit that sub button. We appreciate every single one, and thanks for watching if you made it this far.